The crystal wine glass shattered in my grip, sending shards across the marble kitchen counter. I barely noticed the small cut on my palm, too focused on Emily's words still ringing in my ears. I just think it's such a waste, don't you? A woman your age without children. I mean, what do you even do with your time, Gwen? My name is Gwendolyn, and I've spent the last decade enduring my sister-in-law's not-so-subtle jabs at family gatherings. Today was supposed to be a celebration of Rowan's promotion, but somehow Emily had managed to turn it into another reminder of my supposed shortcomings. Here, let me help you with that, Rowan said, already reaching for the paper towels. His gentle touch on my shoulder spoke volumes. He knew how much these moments hurt. Oh, Gwen's always been a bit clumsy, Emily called from the dining room. Maybe it's for the best she doesn't have little ones running around. Imagine the accidents. I caught Patricia's eye across the room. My best friend had stopped by to drop off some files for work and now stood frozen by the doorway, her expression a mirror of my internal rage. She knew the truth, the whole truth, and I could see her fighting the urge to speak up. Emily, Rowan's voice carried a warning tone. That's enough. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Even Mom mentioned it last Christmas. Then maybe everyone should mind their own business, I snapped, surprising myself with the force in my voice. The room fell silent. Desmond, Emily's husband, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Honey, maybe we should— No, Des, I'm tired of walking on eggshells. We're family. We should be able to discuss these things openly. Emily stood up, wine glass in hand, approaching the kitchen island. I mean, Rowan deserves to be a father. Have you two even tried fertility treatments? Or are you just— The sharp ring of a phone cut through the tension. Desmond fumbled for his cell, frowning at the screen. It's the hospital, he said, stepping away to answer. I busied myself cleaning up the broken glass, trying to ignore the way my hands trembled. Patricia moved closer, pretending to help while whispering, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I muttered, though we both knew it was a lie. The weight of my secret pressed against my chest, threatening to burst out. If they only knew about Natalie. "Yes, this is he." Desmond's voice had taken on an odd tone. "What? When did— Yes, I understand. We'll be right there." The color had drained from his face when he returned to the kitchen. "That was Dr. Matthews. My test results came back. They found something. I need to go in right away." Emily's wine glass joined mine in pieces on the floor. "What do you mean, something? Des, what's wrong?" The room erupted into chaos. Emily crying, Desmond trying to calm her while clearly terrified himself, Rowan already grabbing car keys. In the midst of it all, I caught Patricia's knowing look. We both understood that everything was about to change. "I'll drive," Rowan announced, taking charge. Des, you're in no state. Gwen?" I nodded, already reaching for my coat. As we headed for the door, I heard Patricia's soft voice. "Call me later." The drive to the hospital was tense, filled with Emily's quiet sobs and Desmond's labored breathing. I sat in the back, watching the streetlights blur past, thinking about karma and consequences. For years, Emily had wielded her fertility like a weapon, never knowing the truth about why we chose not to have children. Or rather, why we chose to keep our child a secret. Now, watching her world potentially crumble, I felt no satisfaction, just a hollow ache and the growing certainty that our carefully constructed facade was about to collapse. Rowan caught my eye in the rearview mirror. In that brief glance, I saw the same fear I felt. We both knew what might be coming. The possibility that Desmond's condition might require family medical history, blood tests, donors, the very things we'd structured our entire lives around avoiding. As we pulled into the emergency room parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Natalie's asking about dinner tomorrow. What should I tell her? I stared at the screen, Emily's earlier words echoing in my head. We're family. We should be able to discuss these things openly. If she only knew how open things were about to become. The automatic doors of the ER slid open with a hiss, welcoming us into what I knew would be the beginning of the end of our secret. One way or another, everything was about to change. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room made everything feel surreal. Emily paced back and forth while Rowan filled out paperwork, his handwriting more rushed than usual. I sat quietly, my phone burning a hole in my pocket with Patricia's unanswered text about Natalie. Mrs. Phillips? A doctor in blue scrubs appeared, clipboard in hand. I'm Dr. Matthews. We need to discuss your husband's condition. Emily practically lunged forward. What's wrong with him? Is he going to be okay? The doctor gestured toward the chairs. Please sit down. We've found that Desmond has a rare form of aplastic anemia. His bone marrow isn't producing enough blood cells, and his condition is deteriorating rapidly. What does that mean? Emily's voice cracked. What do we do? He needs a blood transfusion immediately, but his blood type is extremely rare. We're looking at a combination of factors that make finding a match challenging. Rowan stepped forward. I'm his brother, can't I? We've already tested your previous donations, Mr. Chapman. Unfortunately, you're not a match for what we need. Dr. Matthews consulted his clipboard. We need to test all immediate family members as soon as possible. Emily was already rolling up her sleeve. Take mine. Test mine right now. I watched as the nurse drew Emily's blood, followed by more samples from Rowan. The waiting room clock ticked loudly in the silence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. How long until we know? Emily demanded. We'll rush the tests, but it could still be a few hours, the nurse replied. In the meantime, we're searching the national database for potential matches. Emily turned to me suddenly. Gwen, you should get tested too. You never know. I froze. I don't think. Please. She grabbed my hand, all traces of her usual condescension gone. Please, I know we have our differences, but this is Desmond's life we're talking about. Rowan caught my eye, a silent conversation passing between us. We both knew what the tests might reveal, not about me, but about someone else. I'll do it, I said quietly, rolling up my sleeve. The next 3 hours were excruciating. Emily alternated between crying and making frantic phone calls to family members. Rowan paced the hallway, occasionally disappearing to make his own calls. I sat frozen, my mind racing through scenarios, each worse than the last. Finally, Dr. Matthews returned, his expression grim. I'm sorry, but none of you are matches. Emily collapsed into a chair, her shoulders shaking. What do we do now? We need to expand our search. Are there any other family members? Children? Cousins? We don't have children, Emily whispered, then shot me a look that for once held no malice, only desperation. What about your side of the family, Gwen? My throat went dry. I need some air. I practically ran to the hospital garden, Rowan close behind. The cool night air did nothing to calm my racing heart. We have to tell them, I said, the words feeling like glass in my mouth. Gwen, think about this. We agreed. She's 13, Rowan, old enough to understand, old enough to make her own choice. I pulled out my phone, showing him Patricia's text. And she's the only one who might be able to save Desmond's life. You don't know that she'll be a match. But I know her blood type. It's the same as her father's, the same as Desmond's. And given everything else, I trailed off, remembering the genetic counseling we'd received years ago. Rowan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was conflicted. This will change everything. Emily will never forgive us for keeping this secret. Desmond could die, Rowan. Are we really going to let that happen just to keep our secret? A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Chapman, your brother is asking for you. Rowan squeezed my hand before following the nurse. I pulled out my phone and dialed Patricia's number, my fingers trembling. Patricia, I need you to bring Natalie to the hospital. Yes, now. It's time they knew the truth. As I ended the call, I caught sight of Emily through the hospital window, her face buried in her hands. The woman who had spent years making me feel less than, now brought low by circumstances beyond her control. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was tired. Tired of secrets, tired of pretending, tired of the walls we'd built around our lives. In 30 minutes, those walls would come crashing down, and nothing would ever be the same again. Patricia arrived first, her face etched with concern. Natalie's in the car with Mark. Are you sure about this? I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. Where else can we hide when someone's life is at stake? You don't owe them anything, Gwen. After how Emily's treated you all these years, this isn't about Emily. I took a deep breath. It's about doing what's right, and about Natalie having the chance to know her family. Through the glass doors, I could see Natalie stepping out of Mark's car. Even from a distance, she looked so much like my sister Sarah. The same dark curls, the same way of holding herself. Mark's hand on her shoulder was protective, steadying. He'd been there the night Sarah died, had helped us make the decision that would shape the next 13 years. Aunt Gwen, Natalie called out, her smile bright despite the late hour. Patricia said Uncle Desmond is sick? The word uncle hit differently now. Yes, sweetie, but before we go in, we need to talk about something important. We found a quiet corner in the hospital garden. Mark stood watch near the entrance while Patricia sat beside Natalie on the bench. I knelt in front of her, taking her hands in mine. You know how we've always told you about your mom, Sarah? About how she died right after you were born? Natalie nodded. And how you and Uncle Rowan arranged for Patricia to raise me because you weren't ready. That's not the whole truth. My voice cracked. Sarah died because of complications during pregnancy. She was carrying twins. Natalie's eyes widened. Twins? Yes, you and your brother. There were complications during delivery. Your brother didn't make it, and Sarah? I squeezed her hands tighter. Sarah was married to Desmond's cousin. He died in a car accident while Sarah was pregnant. Wait. Natalie pulled back slightly. Uncle Desmond? He's my uncle? Like, really my uncle? Yes, and that's why we need your help. He's very sick and he needs a blood transfusion. You might be the only person who can help him. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, processing. Does he know about me? No one does, except the people here right now. We kept it secret to protect you, to give you a normal life without all the family complications. But now someone's life depends on it, she finished, showing wisdom beyond her years. Will it hurt, the transfusion? Patricia spoke up. Just a little pinch. I'll be right there with you. What about Emily? Will she be mad? The question hung in the air. Mark stepped closer. She might be, kiddo, but that's not your fault. The adults made these decisions, not you. I heard footsteps behind us and turned to see Rowan. His face was drawn with worry. Desmond's getting worse. They're talking about moving him to intensive care. Natalie stood up, straightening her shoulders in a way that reminded me so much of Sarah, it hurt. I want to help, but can I meet him first, before everyone knows? Rowan's eyes filled with tears. Of course, sweetheart. I'll take you to his room. As Natalie walked away with Rowan, Patricia grabbed my arm. What about Emily? She's going to explode when she finds out. Let her, Mark said firmly. Some secrets need to come to light, and maybe this will teach her some humility. I watched through the window as Rowan led Natalie to Desmond's room. Emily was at the nurse's station, filling out more paperwork. She glanced up as they passed, her expression confused but not yet suspicious. "I should go in there," I said, moving toward the door. "Gwen?" Mark's voice stopped me. "Remember what Sarah said that last night about family being more than blood?" I nodded, remembering my sister's final hours, how she made us promise to keep Natalie safe, to give her a life free from the weight of family expectations and obligations. She also said that sometimes the truth sets us free. I replied, "I think it's time we all got free." Walking through those hospital doors felt like crossing a threshold. Behind me lay 13 years of secrets and careful arrangements. Ahead lay uncertainty, confrontation, and probably a lot of anger, but also maybe something better, something honest. Emily looked up as I approached, her mascara streaked from crying. "Who's that girl with Rowan? She looks so familiar." "Emily," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. "We need to talk about Sarah." "Sarah?" Emily's brow furrowed. "Your sister, Sarah? The one who died in childbirth?" I guided her to the nearby waiting area, away from the busy nurses' station. Patricia and Mark followed, creating a protective barrier between us and the rest of the hospital. "Sarah was married to James, Desmond's cousin," I started, watching Emily's face carefully. "When she died, she left behind a daughter." Emily's eyes darted toward Desmond's room, where Natalie was still visible through the window. "That girl. No, no, that's impossible. We would have known. Desmond would have known. James died before the babies were born. Sarah made us promise." "Babies?" Emily's voice rose sharply. "What do you mean, babies?" I took a deep breath. "Twins, a boy and a girl. The boy didn't survive, and Sarah, she knew she wasn't going to make it. She made us promise to protect Natalie, to give her a normal life away from all the family drama." Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. All these years you've let me talk about children, about family, and you had a niece. You let me believe." She stopped, realization dawning. "She looks just like Sarah." Through the window, we could see Natalie sitting beside Desmond's bed, talking quietly while Rowan stood watch. Even in his sedated state, Desmond seemed to respond to her presence. "She's the right blood type," I said softly. "She might be able to save him." Emily's face contorted with conflicting emotions. "How dare you? How dare you keep this from us? From Desmond? She's his family." "She's my family too," I shot back, finding strength in the words. "And I did what I thought was best for her. Sarah knew what this family was like, the expectations, the pressure. She wanted something different for her daughter." "What we're like?" Emily's voice cracked. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark stepped forward. "I was there that night, Emily. Sarah was terrified that her daughter would be raised in a family where her worth would be measured by whose blood ran through her veins, where she'd be seen as an obligation rather than a person." Emily sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "And now you're using her to save Desmond? How is that any different?" "We're not using her," Patricia interjected. "We gave her a choice. She wants to help." The door to Desmond's room opened, and Natalie emerged with Rowan. She walked directly to where we sat, her young face serious but determined. "I want to do the transfusion," she announced. "I want to help Uncle Desmond." Emily stared at her, really looking at her for the first time. "You know who I am?" "Aunt Emily, Patricia's shown me pictures sometimes. And," Natalie hesitated, glancing at me for support, "I've seen you at school events. I always wanted to say hi, but I knew I couldn't." Emily covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping. "All this time? You were right there?" "Patricia raised her just across town," I explained. We arranged it so she could have a normal life, but still be close enough that we could be part of it. Part of it? Emily's voice turned bitter again. You mean you got to be part of it, while the rest of us? The rest of you were too busy judging and measuring everyone else's lives, Rowan cut in sharply. Can you blame us for wanting to protect her from that? The silence that followed was heavy with 13 years of secrets and judgments. Finally, Natalie spoke again, her voice small but clear. Mom, Sarah. She left me letters. She wrote about all of you. She said family was complicated but worth fighting for. I'd like to try if you'll let me. Emily looked up at her, then at me, her face a battlefield of pride and desperation. We need to test her blood type, make sure she's really a match. Already arranged, Rowan said. The doctors are ready whenever Natalie is. Natalie squared her shoulders. I'm ready now. As she walked away with the nurse, Emily caught my arm. Her grip was tight, her voice barely a whisper. If this works, if she saves him, nothing will ever be the same. I watched Natalie disappear around the corner, thinking of Sarah, of secrets, of the walls we build to protect ourselves and others. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The sun was starting to rise outside the hospital windows, painting the sterile walls with hints of gold. A new day was dawning, and with it, the end of our carefully constructed facade. Whether we were ready or not, the truth was finally breaking free. The blood test results came back within the hour. Dr. Matthews could barely contain his relief as he delivered the news. She's a perfect match, he announced. Better than we could have hoped for, actually. The genetic markers are remarkably compatible. Emily, who had been sitting rigidly in the corner, let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Of course they are. She's family. The way she said family made me flinch, like it was both an accusation and a plea. Can we begin the transfusion immediately? Rowan asked. Yes, we're preparing everything now. Natalie's already in the treatment room with... Dr. Matthews glanced at his chart. Ms. Walker? Patricia, I corrected automatically. She's Natalie's legal guardian. Emily's head snapped up. Legal guardian? You mean you didn't even... This isn't the time, Mark interrupted firmly. Let's focus on Desmond. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and tense silences. I stationed myself outside the treatment room, watching through the window as Patricia held Natalie's hand while the nurses worked. My brave girl didn't flinch once as they inserted the needle. She looks just like her, Emily said quietly, appearing beside me. I keep thinking about all the times I must have passed her at school events, never knowing. She was in your daughter's class play last year, I admitted. She played the tree. The one with the beautiful solo? Emily's voice cracked. I recorded it on my phone. I have a video of my niece singing, and I didn't even know it. Before I could respond, Dr. Matthews emerged from Desmond's room. The initial response is promising. His vitals are already showing improvement. Emily sagged against the wall in relief. Can I see him? Briefly, he's still heavily sedated. As Emily disappeared into Desmond's room, Natalie emerged from her treatment, Patricia supporting her slightly wobbly steps. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I asked, rushing to her other side. A bit dizzy, she admitted. But okay. Did it work? Did I help Uncle Desmond? You did amazing, Rowan assured her, pulling up a chair. The doctors say he's already doing better. Natalie smiled weakly, then turned serious. What happens now? With everyone, I mean? Patricia squeezed her shoulder. Whatever you want to happen, honey. This doesn't change anything unless you want it to. But it already has changed, Natalie said, wisdom beyond her years showing in her eyes. And I think maybe it should. Emily emerged from Desmond's room just in time to hear this. She stood awkwardly at the edge of our group, looking lost, so different from her usual confident demeanor. "I'd like to get to know you," she said softly to Natalie. "If you'll let me. I know I don't deserve it, after how I've treated your aunt." "You didn't know," Natalie said simply. "That's no excuse," Emily replied, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I heard genuine remorse in her voice. "I've been horrible to Gwen for years because of my own issues. I was so focused on what I thought family should look like that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Sarah used to say you were actually really nice in high school," Natalie offered, "before everything got complicated." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "She did? You know stories about before?" "I have all her letters," Natalie said, "and Aunt Gwen and Patricia tell me stories sometimes. Would you, would you like to hear some of them?" The olive branch was so unexpected, so graceful, that I had to turn away to hide my own tears. I felt Rowan's arm slip around my waist, steadying me. "I'd love that," Emily whispered. "But first, you need to rest. Doctor's orders." Patricia stepped forward. "We should get her home. She needs to sleep off the effects of the donation." "Wait," Emily said quickly. Could I have your phone number, just to check on you later?" The simple request held so much weight. Acknowledgement, acceptance, the first tentative step toward something new. Natalie recited her number, and I watched Emily save it with trembling fingers. As Patricia and Mark helped Natalie toward the elevator, Emily turned to me. "I know we have a lot to talk about, a lot to work through, but right now, I just want to say thank you for bringing her here, for saving Desmond, for—" She gestured helplessly. "Everything." "She's the one you should thank," I replied. "She chose to help despite everything." "Just like Sarah would have," Emily said softly. We stood there in the hospital hallway, the morning sun streaming through the windows, illuminating all the broken pieces of our family story. But maybe, just maybe, those pieces could be reassembled into something stronger, something truer than before. 3 days after the transfusion, Desmond opened his eyes properly for the first time. The doctors called it a remarkable recovery. Emily called it a miracle. I called Patricia. "He's asking about Natalie," I said into the phone. "He wants to meet her, properly this time." "She's been waiting by the phone," Patricia replied. "Let me guess, family dinner? Emily's insisting on it, tonight at their house. Are you coming? Try and stop me." The house that had been the site of so many uncomfortable family gatherings looked different now. Emily had cleaned frantically all morning, rearranging furniture and fussing over place settings. When the doorbell rang, she nearly dropped the casserole dish she was holding. "I'll get it," I offered, but she shook her head. "No, I need to do this." I watched from the kitchen as Emily opened the door. Natalie stood there with Patricia, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. "Hi, Aunt Emily," she said softly. Emily's carefully composed expression crumbled. "You brought flowers? You shouldn't have. I mean, thank you. They're beautiful. Like you." The awkward moment was broken by Desmond's voice from the living room. "Is that her?" He was still pale, still weak, but sitting up in his favorite armchair. Rowan hovered nearby, ready to help if needed. Natalie approached slowly, the flowers forgotten in Emily's hands. "Hello, Uncle Desmond," she said. "My God," he breathed. "You look just like her, just like Sarah." "That's what everyone says." "Come here, please." He patted the ottoman next to his chair. "I have so many questions, but first, thank you for what you did, for being brave enough to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger," Natalie replied. "You're family. I've known about you my whole life." Emily made a choked sound from the doorway. "We didn't know about you all this time," Maybe we could talk about that over dinner? I suggested, trying to ease the tension. The food's getting cold. Around the dining table, the conversation started hesitantly, then flowed more naturally as Natalie shared stories about growing up, about Patricia's terrible cooking attempts, about Mark teaching her to ride a bike, about secret visits to my house on weekends. Wait, Emily interrupted. All those times you said you were working late? I was with Natalie, I admitted. We didn't want to risk anyone seeing us together in public. It was like having a secret agent family. Natalie grinned. Patricia would drive me to Aunt Gwen's house in her car with the tinted windows. The black Honda? Emily's eyes widened. I've seen that car at school events. We were careful, Patricia said, but we also wanted Natalie to have as normal a life as possible. Desmond set down his fork. I understand why you kept it secret. After James died and then Sarah, everything was so complicated. But now we can do better, Emily finished. She turned to Natalie. If you want to, that is. We could start with school events. I promise not to be too embarrassing. Actually, Natalie glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. I have a solo in the spring concert next month. If you'd like to come. The tears that had been threatening all evening finally spilled down Emily's cheeks. We'd love to, all of us. As a family, Rowan added. Later, as we were clearing the dishes, Emily cornered me by the sink. I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. All those years I spent judging you, making comments about children. You didn't know. That's not an excuse. I was cruel because I was insecure, because I thought having children made me somehow better. But watching you with Natalie tonight, seeing how you've protected her all these years, you're more of a mother than I ever gave you credit for. Before I could respond, Natalie's laugh rang out from the living room, followed by Desmond's deeper chuckle. Through the doorway, I could see them looking at old photos, Patricia and Rowan adding commentary, while Mark recorded everything on his phone. She's going to want to spend more time here, I said. Are you ready for that? Emily dried her hands on a dish towel, her expression thoughtful. I'm ready to try, to be better, to be the kind of aunt, the kind of person she deserves. That's all any of us can do. From the living room, Natalie called out, Aunt Gwen, Uncle Desmond found pictures of Mom from high school. You have to see her hair. Emily and I exchanged a look, years of tension dissolving into something that felt almost like understanding. Together, we walked toward our family, not the one we'd pretended to be, but the one we were finally becoming. The spring concert arrived faster than any of us expected. I found Emily in the school parking lot, pacing nervously with a bouquet that could have stocked a small flower shop. Too much? She asked, gesturing at the flowers. Maybe a little, I admitted, but Natalie will love them. Patricia met us at the entrance, already holding seats. Front row, she announced proudly. Mark's setting up the video camera. Video camera? Emily's voice hitched. I only brought my phone. I didn't think. Don't worry, Rowan appeared behind us. Mark always makes copies for everyone. We settled into our seats. An odd collection of secret keepers turned family. Desmond, still moving carefully but looking much healthier, sat between Emily and me. Remember Sarah's first solo? He whispered. 8th grade talent show. She was so nervous she threw up backstage, I recalled, smiling at the memory. Natalie's stronger than that, Patricia said. You should see her in rehearsals. The lights dimmed, and the concert began. When Natalie stepped onto the stage in her blue dress, the one Emily had helped her pick out last weekend, I heard Emily's sharp intake of breath. She looks just like, I know, I whispered back. Natalie's voice filled the auditorium, clear and confident. She'd chosen Bridge Over Troubled Water, Sarah's favorite song. As she sang, I felt Emily's hand slip into mine, squeezing tightly. The applause was thunderous. Desmond wiped his eyes openly, while Mark struggled to keep the camera steady through his own tears. When Natalie took her bow, she looked directly at our row and beamed. After the concert, we gathered in the school lobby. Emily thrust her massive bouquet forward just as Patricia produced her more modest arrangement. Natalie laughed, trying to juggle both. "You were amazing, sweetheart," Desmond said, hugging her carefully. "Thanks, Uncle Des." She turned to Emily. "Did you really cry? I saw you from stage." "We all did," Rowan admitted. "Your mother would have been so proud," Emily said softly. Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned to me. "And she'd be proud of you too, Gwen. The way you've protected Natalie, guided her." "We all did," I echoed Rowan's words. "Patricia, Mark, all of us." "No," Emily's voice cracked. "I need to say this. I've spent years being horrible to you because I thought having children made me special somehow, made me better. But watching you with Natalie these past few months, seeing how you've always put her first, even when it meant enduring my awful comments." She wiped her eyes. "I was wrong, so wrong." "Aunt Emily," Natalie interrupted, "you're smudging your makeup." The tension broke as everyone laughed. Even Emily managed a watery chuckle. "How about ice cream?" Mark suggested. "I know a place that's open late." At the ice cream parlor, we pushed tables together to fit our unconventional family. Natalie sat between Emily and me, showing us videos on her phone of rehearsals, while Desmond and Rowan argued good-naturedly about whose turn it was to pay. "I have something to ask," Natalie said suddenly, putting down her spoon. "I've been talking with Patricia, and I'd like to spend more time with everyone. Maybe even stay over sometimes, if that's okay." Emily dropped her napkin. "You mean it?" "We could set up the guest room," Desmond added quickly. "Make it yours." "Slow down," Patricia cautioned. "Maybe we start with dinner twice a week. See how it goes?" I watched Natalie's face light up at the suggestion. "That sounds perfect. And maybe," Emily ventured carefully, "we could come to your dance recitals too? All of them, not just the big ones. Even the boring ones where I'm just a backup dancer? Especially those." Desmond grinned. As they discussed schedules and arrangements, I felt Rowan's arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he whispered. I looked at our family, really looked at them. Emily and Natalie planning future performances. Desmond showing Patricia old photos on his phone. Mark still fiddling with his camera. The walls we'd built to protect Natalie had come down, but instead of destruction, we'd found connection. "Sarah would love this," I said softly. "She does," Rowan replied. "She's here, in all of us, especially in the way Natalie brings people together. Just like her mother," Emily overheard us, "always building bridges." "Speaking of building," Natalie piped up, "does this mean I can finally put family photos on my Instagram?" The question set off another round of laughter and discussion about social media boundaries. As I watched them talk, I realized that sometimes the strongest families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones you build, even if it takes 13 years and a few medical emergencies to get there. The autumn breeze scattered leaves across Sarah's headstone as I placed fresh flowers beside it. Behind me, I heard the crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves. "I thought I'd find you here," Emily said softly, holding her own bouquet. "Natalie told me you always visit on Thursdays." "It's our tradition," I replied, though usually it's just me and Patricia. "Do you mind if I—" She gestured to the grave. "Of course not. She was your friend, too." Emily knelt beside me, arranging her flowers next to mine. "I've never been here before. I couldn't, after everything that happened. But Natalie showed me Sarah's letters last night, and I realized how much I've missed." Sarah would have loved seeing Natalie perform at the Harvest Festival yesterday, I said, especially with you and Desmond cheering so loudly in the front row. We embarrassed her terribly, Emily laughed, then grew serious. I keep thinking about what Sarah wrote in those letters, about wanting Natalie to grow up free from family pressure. I was exactly what she was afraid of, wasn't I? Before I could respond, more footsteps approached. Natalie appeared, followed by Patricia, Rowan, Desmond, and Mark. Family meeting at the cemetery? Natalie asked, raising an eyebrow. More like a reunion, Mark said, producing a thermos. Hot chocolate, anyone? Your mother's recipe, Natalie. We settled on the blanket Mark spread out, passing the thermos around. Natalie sat between Emily and me, pulling out a worn envelope. I found another letter last night, she announced. It was dated just before. You know, Mom wrote about all of you. You don't have to share it, Patricia said gently. I want to. Natalie unfolded the paper carefully. Dear baby girl, I wish I could be there to see you grow up, but I know you'll be surrounded by love. Your Aunt Gwen will protect you fiercely. Patricia will give you a normal life. Mark will make you laugh. Rowan will be your rock. She paused, glancing at Emily and Desmond. And your Uncle Desmond and Aunt Emily? They'll learn that family isn't about perfect appearances or meeting expectations. It's about love, even when it's messy and complicated. Give them time. They'll figure it out eventually. Emily wiped her eyes. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. She always did, Desmond agreed. Remember when she predicted we'd end up together? We thought she was crazy. Stories began flowing then. Memories of Sarah, of shared childhoods, of mistakes made and lessons learned. Natalie soaked it all in, occasionally adding her own insights from the letters she'd grown up reading. I have something to tell you all, Emily said during a lull in the conversation. I've been seeing a therapist, working through my issues about family and control. I want to be better, for all of you, but especially for Natalie. That's brave, I said, meaning it. It's necessary, she replied. I don't want to be the aunt everyone dreads seeing at family gatherings anymore. Too late, Natalie teased. Now you're the aunt who brings embarrassingly large bouquets and cheers too loudly at school events. Much better, Desmond laughed, pulling Emily close. Mark raised the thermos. To Sarah, who somehow planned all this from beyond. To Mom, Natalie echoed. Who knew we'd figure it out eventually? As the others continued sharing stories, I traced Sarah's name on the headstone. The secret I'd carried for 13 years had transformed from a burden into a bridge, connecting us all in ways I never expected. Aunt Gwen? Natalie's voice pulled me back. Thank you for everything, for keeping me safe, for letting me choose when to know everyone, for giving me all these people who love me. Your mother knew what she was doing, I said. She knew love would win out eventually. Even over Emily's pride? Desmond teased, earning a playful swat from his wife. Especially over that, Emily admitted, though I maintain those bouquets aren't too big. They're bigger than Natalie, Patricia laughed. As the banter continued, I watched my family, not perfect, not conventional, but real and whole. The walls we'd built to protect Natalie had become foundations for something stronger, Sarah's final gift to us all. The autumn sun began to set, painting the cemetery in warm golds and reds. None of us moved to leave. We had all the time in the world now, and so many stories left to share.
Growing up, it was like living in two different worlds under the same roof. My sister, Emma, was the star, shining bright with every step she took. Me? I was Lily, the other daughter, blending into the background so well you'd forget I was there. Emma, darling, how was school today? Mom would coo the moment Emma stepped through the door, her eyes sparkling with genuine interest. Killed it, as usual, Emma would reply, tossing her bag down with a confidence I could never muster. Got an A on the math test, and Mr. Jenkins said I'm a shoo-in for the lead in the school play. That's my girl. Dad would chime in, his pride swelling like a balloon ready to pop. Nothing but the best for my princess. I'd usually hover in the doorway, half hoping someone would ask about my day. But it was like I was invisible, a ghost in my own home. Hey, I'd mutter, more to myself than anyone else, knowing well enough not to expect much of a response. Mom would occasionally throw my way, her attention never veering from Emma's glowing reports. Dinner times were no different. Conversations danced around Emma's achievements, future college plans, and dreams that seemed as reachable for her as the stars. I'd pick at my food, throwing in a comment here and there, only to be drowned out by the next exciting chapter of Emma's life. It wasn't like I didn't have my moments. I did well at school, not that anyone noticed. But it was Emma who had the spotlight, while I lingered in the shadows, applause echoing over to where I stood, silent and unseen. When Emma got her acceptance letter to a prestigious college, the house erupted. It was all they could talk about. Plans were made, budgets adjusted, all for Emma. I can't believe it. We need to start planning right away. There's so much to do. Mom was practically vibrating with excitement, her mind racing through a checklist of preparations. I knew she could do it. We'll support you every step of the way, Emma. Whatever you need, Dad declared, his chest puffed out with pride. Sitting at the edge of the living room, I couldn't help but wonder about my own future. High school was almost over for me too, but there were no college brochures with my name on them, no discussions about my dreams or aspirations. One evening, I gathered my courage, deciding to broach the subject. Hey, have you guys thought about what happens next for me? College, maybe? The room went quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, loaded. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them before Mom finally spoke. Lily, you know we're stretched thin with Emma's college fund. Maybe you could take a gap year, find a job, save up some? Yeah, sis, college isn't for everyone, Emma added, her voice dripping with a condescension she probably didn't even realize. Besides, you're not exactly Ivy League material, are you? The word stung, a slap to my already bruised ego. But I swallowed the hurt, nodding as if I understood, as if it made all the sense in the world. Right, of course, I mumbled, my dreams deflating like a balloon pricked with a needle. I'll figure something out. Leaving home wasn't just a choice, it felt like my only shot at proving I wasn't just the leftover daughter. So, I packed up my life into a couple of bags and moved into a cramped apartment with two girls I barely knew. The place was a far cry from comfortable, but it was a start. To keep the roof over my head and chase the college dream, I landed myself not one, but two jobs. My days began before sunrise and ended long after the moon had risen, each day blurring into the next in a relentless cycle of work and exhaustion. Yo, Lily, you sure you can handle both gigs? You're running yourself ragged, Jenna, one of my roommates, pointed out one evening as I collapsed onto our second-hand couch. Got no choice, do I? I shot back, trying to massage the day's toil out of my shoulders. It's this, or kiss college goodbye. You're one tough cookie, I'll give you that. Sarah, the other roommate, chimed in, tossing me a sympathetic look. Just don't burn out, alright? We kinda like having you around. Their concern was a balm to the raw edges of my determination. I'll be fine. Just gotta keep at it, I replied, though deep down, the relentless pace was starting to take its toll. And then, as if life decided I hadn't had enough kicks, it threw me a curveball that would knock me flat on my back, literally. I got sick, the kind of sick that laughs in the face of your plans and drains your bank account without a second thought. My savings, every penny I had scrimped and saved for college, vanished like smoke, eaten up by medical bills that my joke of an insurance wouldn't cover. I remember sitting in that cold, sterile hospital room, the numbers on the bill making my head spin. This can't be right, I muttered to myself, hoping it was all just a big mistake. But no, the numbers didn't lie. And neither did the empty pit in my stomach when I realized all the money I'd saved for college was about to be swallowed whole by this disaster. I was out of the hospital, but not out of the woods. No job, no savings, and a body still too weak to even think about working the way I used to. Desperation led me to the one place I vowed I wouldn't go back to, home. Mom, Dad, I need a place to stay, just for a little while. Until I get back on my feet, I said, standing at the doorstep, feeling smaller than ever. The door was barely open a crack, my parents' faces peeking out, their expressions tight. Lily, now's not a good time, Mom said, her voice laced with something like regret, or maybe it was just inconvenience. Yeah, with Emma's wedding and all, we're really stretched thin as it is, Dad added, not meeting my eyes. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Stretched thin? I'm not asking for money, just a roof. Aren't I your daughter too? It's just, Emma's going to move back in after the wedding. Her and Mark need the space. You understand, right? Mom's attempt at sympathy felt like a slap in the face. Understand? No, I don't understand. I snapped, anger boiling over. You've always made room for Emma, always. And here I am, asking for once in my life, and you're telling me there's no space for me? Lily, please, this isn't easy for us either, Dad said, but it was too little too late. Save it. I get it. I've always been the second choice, the backup plan. Well, guess what? I don't need you. Never did. I spat, the words bitter on my tongue. Turning away, I felt the final thread connecting me to this so-called family snap. I was alone, truly alone, but I was determined not to let this be the end of my story. Damn them. Damn all of them, I'd whisper into the darkness, a promise to myself more than anything. I'd get through this, on my own terms. And when I did, I wouldn't look back. After my family turned their backs on me, I hit rock bottom. No cash, no place to crash, nothing. In a moment of sheer desperation, I dialed Aunt June, Mom's sister. Unlike Mom and Dad, Aunt June had always been the straight shooter of the family, never one to mince her words. Hey, Aunt June, it's Lily. I'm kinda in a bind, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lily? What's wrong, kiddo? Her voice was laced with concern, a stark contrast to the cold reception I'd gotten from my parents. I spilled everything, from the illness that drained my savings to being turned away by my own folks. There was a heavy pause on the line before she finally spoke up. Pack your bags. You're staying with me, she said, no room for argument in her tone. I couldn't believe it. Relief washed over me in an instant. Thank you, Aunt June. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just get here, she replied, and that was that. Staying with Aunt June was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. Her home was modest but warm, filled with the kind of love and acceptance I'd craved for years. 2 weeks into my stay, we sat down at her kitchen table, a pot of her infamous strong coffee between us. Lily, what do you want to do with your life? Really do? She asked, her gaze piercing. I hesitated, not used to being asked about my dreams. I've always wanted to be a lawyer, I admitted, almost whispering. Aunt June leaned back, considering my words. A lawyer, huh? That's no easy path. You willing to work for it? More than anything, I replied, feeling a spark of hope ignite within me. All right then. I'll support you, pay for your college. But I've got one condition, she said, her tone serious. Anything, I said, eager. You study hard. No slacking, no excuses. You aim for the top, understand? I'm not funding a half-hearted attempt. She laid down her terms, clear as crystal. A grin spread across my face, the first genuine smile in what felt like ages. You got it, Aunt June. I won't let you down. And just like that, my life took a new direction. I enrolled in college, a fact I kept from the rest of my family. The days were long, classes during the day, studying into the night, and helping Aunt June around the house whenever I could. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. Remember, Lily, hard work's the key. You keep at it, and there's nothing you can't achieve, Aunt June would remind me, her belief in me a constant source of strength. Thanks, Aunt June. I won't forget, I'd promise, holding on to her words like a lifeline. Aunt June's support was my rock, her home my sanctuary. And as I buried myself in my studies, I knew I was building a future where I stood tall, no longer overshadowed or forgotten. A future where I'd make not just Aunt June, but myself proud. Life at college was a mix of hitting the books hard and the occasional release at parties with my classmates. I was pulling double duty, ASL in my studies, and working as a lawyer's assistant. The job didn't make me rich, but it paid enough to cover my needs. Aunt June's place felt more like home every day, and we got real close, like mother and daughter close. One night, out of the blue, she told me, "Lily, I always wished for a kid like you." That hit me deep, made me realize how much I'd come to mean to her. My crew from college was solid. We'd hit parties when we could, just letting off steam and trying to remember we were still young and alive amidst the chaos of law school. But one night, I got home way later than I planned. Aunt June was up, sitting in the dim light of the living room, looking like she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. As I stumbled in, trying to be quiet but failing miserably, she looked up, her face stern but worried. "Lily, we need to talk," she said, her voice cutting through the late-night fog in my brain. "Sure, Aunt June, what's up?" I replied, trying to sound sober and probably failing. "It's about your priorities, kiddo. You've been going to these parties a lot. I see how hard you're working, but I'm worried you're losing sight of why you're here." She laid it out straight, no sugarcoating. I felt a lump in my throat. She was right. "I'm sorry, Aunt June. You're right. I've been messing up. It won't happen again, I promise. My studies and the job, they're my priority." I lost track of that. Aunt June's expression softened. "I know you're young and need to have fun, but you've got a rare chance here, Lily. Don't waste it. I believe in you, always have. Just, make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin, alright?" "Thanks, Aunt June. I needed to hear that. No more parties for me. It's time to buckle down even harder," I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. From that day on, I cut out the distractions. I dived deeper into my studies and work, determined to make Aunt June proud and to not let myself down. The parties and late nights gave way to early mornings in the library and long hours at the law office. It wasn't easy, balancing it all, but knowing I had Aunt June's support and believing in the path I'd chosen kept me going. My classmates noticed the shift. "Lily's gone all in, huh? Barely see her out anymore," they'd say. But I knew I was making the right call. The goal wasn't just to get through law school, it was to excel, to build a future I could be proud of. 7 years zipped by faster than I ever thought possible. There I was, standing on the graduation stage at 27, with my name being called out for excellence. In that sea of faces, there was one that stood out, glowing with a mix of happiness and pride, Aunt June. She was the only family I had there, the only one I needed. Her support had been unwavering, her faith in me unshakable. As I walked across the stage to receive my accolades, I caught her eye and saw a tear roll down her cheek. It was a moment I'd never forget. "This is for us, Aunt June," I whispered under my breath, my heart full. After graduation, I landed a job at a prestigious law firm. It felt like a dream. All those years of grinding, studying, and working had paid off. I was making a name for myself, proving I wasn't just the overlooked second child. One evening, Aunt June and I sat down for one of our heart-to-hearts. She had a way of turning any conversation into a deep reflection on life. "You've done so well for yourself, Lily. I always knew you had it in you," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Thanks to you, Aunt June. You believed in me when no one else did, I replied, feeling a mix of gratitude and concern for her evident fatigue. That's when she dropped the news about Emma. Your sister, well, she didn't finish college. Got pregnant and married her classmate. They're living with your folks now, all cozy with their 3 kids. I hope they're happy, was all I could muster, but inside, I couldn't help but wonder about the what-ifs. Our conversation was cut short when Aunt June's illness became apparent. It came out of nowhere, hitting us like a freight train. Before I knew it, she was gone. The woman who had been my rock, my family, left me in a world that suddenly seemed too big and too empty. In her will, Aunt June left me her house. It was a beautiful gesture, but it paled in comparison to the loss of her presence. I moved in, surrounded by memories of our time together, each room a testament to her love and belief in me. Alone in that house, I realized how much Aunt June had shaped my life. She had given me more than a roof over my head, she had given me the strength to chase my dreams, to rise from the ashes of my past. Several months after Aunt June's passing, life threw me another curveball. My family, who hadn't bothered with me in years, suddenly decided to show up on my doorstep. The reason? The inheritance Aunt June left me. The moment they walked in, Emma started eyeing the place like a hawk scoping out its next meal, talking about moving in with her husband and kids as if I wasn't even there. This kitchen's perfect for the kids' breakfast. And look at that backyard. They'll love it, Emma said, parading around like she owned the place. Stunned by her nerve, I tried to interject. Hold on. This is my house. You can't just decide to move in. That's when my parents chimed in, echoing Emma's sentiment, with a logic that was lost on me. Lily, you're all by yourself here. Emma needs the space more than you do. It's only fair, my mom argued, as if fairness had ever been a priority in our family. The gall of their request hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories of being turned away when I was at my lowest flooded back. Fair? You call this fair? I shot back, my voice rising. Where was this family fairness when I was sick and needed a place to stay? You turned me away, remember? And now you want my house? They brushed off my words like they were nothing, continuing their tour of the house as if I hadn't spoken. Emma and her husband whispered to each other about where they'd place their furniture, while my parents debated which rooms would be best for the kids. I couldn't believe the audacity. You're not listening to me. This house is mine, left to me by Aunt June, not you. You made it clear years ago, we're hardly family when you shut me out. You can't just waltz back into my life and demand I hand over everything. But it was like talking to a wall. Their arrogance was impenetrable, their entitlement to my life's refuge, baffling. Look at this room, it'll be perfect for the baby, Emma said, blatantly ignoring my protests. That was the last straw. Enough. Get out of my house. Now. I demanded, my patience completely shattered. They hesitated, taken aback by my firm stance. Finally, my dad muttered, "Let's go," herding Emma and her family out the door, but not without parting shots of calling me selfish and greedy. As I slammed the door behind them, a mix of relief and anger washed over me. The audacity of their visit was astounding. But in that moment, I also felt a deep sense of pride. Aunt June's house was a symbol of the strength and independence I had fought so hard to achieve. I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me, family or not. After a long day filled with back-to-back cases at the law firm, I was looking forward to the quiet comfort of my home. However, as I approached the front door, my key refused to turn in the lock. Confusion turned to disbelief when I realized the locks had been changed. Knocking hard, I barely had time to process the situation when the door swung open. There stood my sister, Emma, flanked by her husband and their children, an air of defiance about her. We've decided to move in. It's better for the kids, and there's plenty of space, Emma stated matter-of-factly, as if it was the most natural decision in the world. I stared at them, a mix of anger and shock coursing through me. This is my house. You can't just decide to move in and change the locks without my permission. I'll call the police if I have to. Emma scoffed, her husband smirking by her side. Go ahead. They won't do anything. We're family. But I wasn't bluffing. I dialed the police, my fingers trembling with a cocktail of emotions. Before long, my parents arrived, turning the situation into a full-blown family confrontation. Voices rose, tensions flared, and amidst the chaos, Emma's husband made a veiled threat towards me. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone and started recording, capturing his words and the ensuing uproar. He lunged for my phone, but I dodged, holding my ground. The arrival of the police cut through the noise. I explained the situation, showing them the deed to the house in my name and the video of the threats made against me. My mother, tears streaming down her face, tried to appeal to the officers. Please, she's our daughter. This is just a misunderstanding among family. But I stood firm, the weight of my aunt's legacy and my own hard-won independence anchoring me. They broke into my home and tried to force me out. That's not a misunderstanding. It's a crime. The officers nodded, their presence bringing a semblance of order to the chaos. After a tense discussion, it was clear the law was on my side. My family, realizing the seriousness of their actions, reluctantly left my property. The moment they were gone, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The police advised me to change the locks again and consider a restraining order if the harassment continued. I called a locksmith immediately, ensuring this breach of my sanctuary would never happen again. After all that drama with my family trying to barge into my life and take over my house, things got pretty loud for a while. My sister, Emma, went around telling everyone who'd listen about how I'd supposedly turned cold and heartless. She even took to social media, posting pictures of her kids with these sappy captions about wanting a big house to live in. Trying to make me out to be the villain in her little sob story. But you know what? I couldn't care less. I saw those posts, sure. Scrolled right past them. I was done playing their games, letting them make me feel small. I cut off communication with them entirely. It was like shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Then, in the middle of sorting out my life and figuring out my next steps, I met someone. His name's Mike, and he's about as straightforward and genuine as they come. We bumped into each other at a local coffee shop, of all places. I was trying to balance my laptop and a cup of too hot coffee, and he just swooped in, saving the day before I made a complete mess. Whoa, careful there. He laughed, steadying my laptop with one hand while helping me sit down with the other. Thanks, I said, feeling a bit flustered but grateful. I'm usually not this clumsy. I don't know, seems like you were about to give that laptop a coffee bath. I'm Mike, by the way. He introduced himself with an easy smile. I'm Lily, I replied, and something about the way he looked at me made me feel like maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. Mike and I hit it off pretty quickly. He had this way of making me laugh, really laugh, in a way I hadn't in a long time. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other almost every day. He'd come over, and we'd talk about everything and nothing until the early hours of the morning. It was easy, comfortable, and exactly what I needed. It wasn't long after that Mike moved in. It felt right, like he was meant to be there all along. Together, we turned my house into a home, filled with love, laughter, and an unspoken understanding that no matter what came our way, we'd face it together. And to anyone who's still listening to Emma's stories and feeling sorry for her? Well, they don't know the half of it. I've learned that some battles aren't worth fighting, and the only approval I need is my own. This is my life, my new beginning, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Life's funny, you know? 1 minute you're just a regular girl, working 9 to 5, living a simple, uneventful life, and the next, you're caught up in a whirlwind romance that feels like it's straight out of a movie. That's exactly what happened to me. I was 25, working as an assistant at a bustling law firm downtown. It was all about paperwork, court dates, and endless coffee runs. Not exactly glamorous, but it paid the bills. Then, at a friend's birthday bash, I met Alex. He was different, charming, with a rough edge that I found irresistible. He worked as a construction foreman for this big company that had him traveling all over the place. We hit it off instantly, finding solace in our shared love for cheap beer and disdain for fancy parties. Our conversations were real, filled with laughter and a dash of sarcasm. Before we knew it, a short, fiery romance blossomed between us. It was intense, passionate, and completely unexpected. We were like two puzzle pieces that somehow fit perfectly together. "Marry me, Alice," Alex said one night, out of the blue, his voice rough but sincere. We were sitting on my small apartment's balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance. I remember laughing, thinking he was joking. "You serious?" I asked, my heart racing. "As a heart attack," he replied, his gaze locked on mine. And just like that, we decided to tie the knot. No grand gestures, no fancy proposal, just us, making a spontaneous decision that felt right. Our wedding was a simple affair, just close friends and family. My parents had passed away years ago, so it felt bittersweet not having them there. But Alex's mom, Laura, she was like a rock, supportive and kind. She was all Alex had, and soon, she became family to me too. Life after marriage was different. I quit my job to focus on our family, welcoming our son David into the world not long after. Alex's job kept him on the road a lot, but we managed. Or at least, I thought we did. Laura was my go-to whenever things got tough. With Alex away and no parents of my own to lean on, she was my lifeline. "Hey, you're doing great, Alice," Laura would say, her voice always soothing. She had this way of making you feel like everything was going to be okay, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. It wasn't long before the cracks started to show. Alex's business trips got longer, and the money wasn't flowing as freely as it used to. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I remember confronting Alex about it one night, after putting David to bed. "What's going on, Alex? You're barely home, and we're struggling to make ends meet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ah, come on, don't start with that again. You know I'm doing this for us," he snapped, his tone harsher than I expected. "But it doesn't feel like us anymore. It's like you're living a whole other life," I pushed back, feeling my frustration rise. "You think this is easy for me? You think I enjoy being away? You have no idea how hard I'm working," he retorted, his face tense. The conversation went nowhere. We ended up going to bed angry, the silence between us heavy. I lay there, listening to his steady breathing, feeling a million miles away from the man I married. When David turned 5, Alex dropped a bombshell on me one evening as we were clearing up dinner. "You need to start working, babe. Can't just be me bringing in the dough anymore," he said, not even looking me in the eye. I remember freezing, a plate in hand. "Work? But what about David? Who'll pick him up from school, do the house stuff?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure it out. Lots of moms work and manage just fine," he shrugged, as if it was the most obvious solution in the world. So, I found myself a job as a manager at a small car repair shop. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. My days became a blur of work, school runs, and trying to keep our little home from turning into a disaster zone. Alex's contributions dwindled with time, and his business trips stretched so long, I sometimes forgot what it was like to have him around. One night, after putting David to bed and sitting down with the bills, worry gnawed at me like a hungry rat. I dialed Alex, who was supposedly on another one of his never-ending business trips. "Alex, we need to talk. The money's not stretching as far as it used to. What's going on?" I asked as soon as he picked up, my voice tight with worry. "Oh, not this again," Alex groaned from the other end, his voice laced with annoyance. I'm busting my ass out here, and this is the thanks I get? You nagging about money? I recoiled as if slapped. I'm just trying to understand, to figure out how we can make things better, I said, softer this time, hoping to steer the conversation into calmer waters. Well, maybe if you managed our finances better, we wouldn't be in this mess, he retorted, adding insult to injury. I felt a lump form in my throat, guilt and anger warring within me. Fine. Just try to come home soon, okay? I said finally, the fight draining out of me. Yeah, whatever, Alex muttered before hanging up. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And with Alex growing more distant with each passing day, I felt like I was staring down a long, dark tunnel with no light at the end. It was just another one of those days, you know? The kind where you're running on autopilot, trying to keep all the balls in the air, work, kid, house. But David, bless his heart, had just brought home this report card that was nothing short of amazing. I was bursting, had to share it with Alex, thinking it would be a nice break from whatever chaos he was wrapped up in. So, I called him, my heart kind of doing that fluttery thing because, despite everything, part of me was still that girl who fell for the charming guy. The phone rings, and I'm picturing him picking up, maybe smiling, when he hears the news. But nah, life had another curveball ready. A woman answers. Not just any woman, but the kind whose voice drips with a mix of annoyance and superiority. Yeah? Who's this? She barks into the phone. I'm standing there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I'm his wife. I managed to spit out, my voice a mix of shock and anger. Who the hell are you? Oh, honey, she says, and I can almost hear the smirk. You must be the sad little wife. Listen up, he's in the shower. And you? You need to stop calling. Stop asking for money. He's got a real family now. My world stopped. Just like that. It felt like I was falling, and there was no ground in sight. I hung up, my hands shaking, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Without thinking, I dialed Laura, Alex's mom. She's always been more than just a mother-in-law to me, she's been a friend, a confidant, a lifeline. Laura. I choked out, the moment she picked up. You won't believe what just happened. Laura's voice, usually so calm and soothing, went ice cold. Tell me everything, she said, and so I did. I told her about the woman, the words that felt like daggers, everything. There was a heavy silence, and then, I'm coming over, Alice. We're going to sort this out, Laura declared, her tone brooking no argument. When she arrived, her face was set in a way that told me she was ready for war. We sat at my kitchen table, cups of tea untouched in front of us, and hashed out a plan. Laura was furious, more so than I'd ever seen her. I'm calling him, she announced, pulling out her phone with a determination that was almost scary. The conversation was short and anything but sweet. Alex refused to talk, told his mom to mind her own business, to tell me to stop bothering him. But Laura, oh, she was magnificent. You listen to me, she said, her voice steel wrapped in velvet. You're about to lose everything. I'm disinheriting you. Everything goes to David. Hanging up, she looked at me, her eyes softening. We'll get through this, she said, reaching for my hand. We're stronger than his cowardice. I landed a job at a local bakery. Baking had always been my thing, a way to lose myself in something simple and sweet. The owner, Mr. Jacobs, was a gruff old man with a heart of gold buried somewhere deep under his crusty exterior. Listen, I don't have time for people who aren't serious. You gonna work hard, or are you gonna waste my time? He barked during the interview. I looked him straight in the eye, my resolve steeling. I'll be the hardest worker you've got. Just give me a chance. He must have seen something in me, some spark of determination, because he grunted. All right, you start Monday. Don't make me regret it. Working at the bakery was a lifeline. It was hard, sure. Early mornings, long hours, but there was something about kneading dough and watching things rise from the oven that felt like healing. Like I was building something new from scratch, just like my life. Laura was a godsend. She stepped in to help with David, picking him up from school and helping with homework. Our evenings were spent at her place or mine, going over the day, sharing meals. We were a team, me, her, and David against the world. One evening, after putting David to bed, Laura and I sat down with a cup of tea. "You're doing good, Alice," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Some days are better than others," I admitted, staring into my cup. "But I'm trying. For David." "That's all you can do. Try. Keep moving forward. Alex, he made his choices. Now we make ours." David and I settled into this new rhythm, with Laura's help. The days were long, but there was this sense of purpose that kept me pushing forward. It was during one of those late nights, after a long shift at the bakery and David was sound asleep, that I made a decision. I was going to file for divorce. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, tethered to a man who had so clearly moved on. The next day, I called a lawyer, a friend of a friend who didn't charge me an arm and a leg. "I want to file for divorce," I told him, my voice steady. "And I want to sue for alimony for David. He shouldn't suffer because his father made selfish choices." Then, the call came. "Alex." His voice was like a thunderclap on the other end of the line, full of rage and disbelief. "You're suing me? For alimony? You've got some nerve, asking for money after everything." I held the phone away from my ear, his shouts echoing in the quiet room. It would have been easy to shrink back, to apologize and beg him to calm down. But I was done being the meek and mild wife he thought he could bully. "I'm not asking for me," I shot back, my own anger rising to match his. "This is for David. Remember him? Your son?" There was a snarl on the other end. "I won't give you a dime. And I'm not signing any damn divorce papers." I could feel my heart racing, but my voice was ice cold as I replied, "You'll talk to my lawyer. This isn't up for discussion." And with that, I hung up, ending the call and, in a way, closing the chapter on the man I once thought I'd spend my life with. The divorce was messy, dragged out by Alex's stubborn refusal to cooperate. But in the end, the court ruled in our favor. The judge granted the divorce and ordered Alex to pay alimony for David. It was a victory, bitter, but necessary. After the dust settled from the divorce and alimony battles, life found a new kind of normal. The bakery job was going well, and I was slowly putting away some savings, hoping to give David something resembling a stable future. But as David grew into his teenage years, I started noticing the gap between us widening. One evening, after a particularly long day, I tried to breach that growing chasm. David was at the kitchen table, buried in his homework, or so it seemed. "Hey, how's school going?" I asked, trying to sound casual, hoping for just a sliver of conversation. "It's fine," he mumbled, not looking up from his books. That was his standard answer these days, fine, a word that managed to say nothing at all. I sighed, leaning against the counter. "You know, I saw a flyer for the science fair. Thought maybe you'd be interested?" David shrugged, the universal language of teenage indifference. "Maybe." The conversation ended there, David retreating back into his shell, me left standing alone in the kitchen, feeling helpless. It was a feeling I'd become all too familiar with. Later, I confided in Laura over a cup of coffee. "I don't know what to do. He's slipping away from me, and I can't seem to bridge the gap." Laura sipped her coffee, her brow furrowed in thought. "Teenagers are tough, but he'll come around. You're doing everything you can." Her words were meant to be comforting, but they couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I was losing my son, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. Our exchanges were brief, often strained. One evening, trying to bridge the widening gap, I ventured, "How's the college search going? Found anywhere you like?" David's response was curt, a quick, "It's fine," without looking up from his device. That word again, fine, the most non-committal of reassurances. Hoping to engage him more, I mentioned, there are some great scholarships out there. We could look into them together? He finally glanced up, his eyes cold. I'll manage on my own. Don't need to bother with that. It's not like you can afford to help anyway. His words hit like a physical blow, reminding me painfully of Alex's departure and the financial struggles that followed. I just want to help, I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. David shrugged, dismissing the conversation and, it felt, dismissing me. I've got it covered. I'm going to Norman, got everything planned out. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. He went to college, leaving not just our home but our city, diving into a new life where I seemed to have no place. Calls became rare, then stopped altogether. Holidays came and went without his presence. I sent messages, holiday greetings, and a bit of money when I could scrape it together, clinging to the hope that he still needed me in some small way. Years rolled by, and the void between David and me felt like it had cemented into something permanent. That was until one ordinary day turned extraordinary by gossip that felt like a slap across the face. My son, my David, was getting married. The news didn't come from him, though. I wrestled with the shock, disbelief coursing through me, before I picked up the phone. My heart hammered against my ribs as it rang, each tone a drumbeat to the impending confrontation. David, I breathed, barely containing the whirlwind of emotions. Is it true? You're getting married? There was a pause, a silence that stretched too thin, before he replied, his voice a mixture of resignation and detachment. Yeah, it's true. I didn't think you'd care to know. The words stung, more than I'd anticipated. How could you think that? David, you're my son. Of course, I care. Another pause, this one heavier, loaded with unsaid things. I'd prefer it if you didn't come. I just don't want you there. The finality in his tone shattered any hope of reconciliation. The call ended with pleasantries that felt hollow, leaving me staring at the phone long after the line went dead. Laura, when I told her, was aghast. That's not right. There's something more to this, I'm sure of it. Her conviction sparked a flicker of hope, or maybe it was stubbornness, within me. With a resolve that felt like defiance against David's wishes, I decided to go. Not to make a scene, but to show them all, that a mother's love isn't so easily dismissed. Laura, bless her, stood by me, a united front against whatever lay ahead. We found out the wedding details through a mix of sleuthing and sheer luck, courtesy of David's more talkative friends. An expensive gift was purchased, a silent testament to my love for him, regardless of the chasm between us. Laura and I, a duo driven by a mix of determination and apprehension, arrived at the restaurant. The venue was buzzing, a hive of activity and festive cheer that felt alien to me. We entered, unnoticed at first, the anonymity a small mercy as we took in the scene. There was David, looking every bit the groom, and his fiancée, radiant. And then, like a ghost from the past, there was Alex, with her, the woman who had helped him tear our world apart. David's reaction to seeing us was a storm of confusion and anger. Mom? Grandma? What are you doing here? His voice was a mix of incredulity and irritation, the sight of us an unwelcome surprise. I stepped forward, the weight of the gift in my hands grounding me. I came to give you this, to wish you happiness, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You're my son. I had to be here, even if you didn't want me to be. His gaze flickered to the gift, then back to me, a storm of emotions playing across his face. I told you I didn't want you here, he said, each word a blade. Laura, ever the peacemaker, chimed in, her voice soft but firm. David, we're not here to cause a scene. We just want to wish you well. That's all. The tension was palpable, a living thing that wrapped around us. Guests stared, whispers fluttering like leaves in the wind. The air was thick with tension as David confronted me with accusations that cut deep. You cheapskate, he spat. You couldn't even pay for my college or help with the wedding. I'm so ashamed of you, living in that tiny apartment like a loser." My heart sank as I listened to his cruel words. I had always tried my best for him, but it was never enough. Then it hit me, he knew about his father. He had found out that the man I had hidden from him for all these years was a co-owner of a construction company, living in a mansion. And he had chosen him over me. "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Alex stepped forward, a smug look on his face. "I had a sudden change of heart," he lied. "Paternal instincts, you know." I knew he was lying, but what could I do? My son had betrayed me, and now his father was rubbing it in my face. Just then, my son opened the gift I had brought him. His eyes widened as he saw the expensive watch inside. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Your grandmother gave me some money," I said. "I started my own business, baking. It took off. I've opened several branches now." David looked out the window and saw my new car parked below. He rushed over to me, his face softening. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have said those things." But it was too late. I had been hurt too deeply. "You're just like your father," I said. "You betrayed me." At that moment, Laura stepped forward. "I've decided to change my will," she said to David. "I'm leaving what I have to your mother. You and your father, you've made your choices." My son's face turned ashen. Alex lunged at his mother, screaming that he needed the money. What? That was supposed to be my backup plan. I invested in his education for this. I didn't need David, but his future inheritance. The scene descended into chaos, Alex's mistress joining in, her voice shrill with panic. "We need that money. Without it, he's facing jail time." But Laura just smiled and said, "You're on your own, son. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it." I looked around the room at the people who had wronged me. My ex-husband, my son, and his mistress. They were all broken and alone, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Laura and I left the venue, the heavy door closing behind us felt symbolic, like the end of a chapter. 6 months after the dust had settled, my phone rang, and on the other end was the last person I expected, or wanted, to hear from, Alex. "Hey, it's me," he started, his voice laced with a desperation I hadn't heard before. I need your help. I'm in deep, really deep. If I don't come up with some cash, they're gonna throw me behind bars." The audacity of his request left me speechless for a moment. After everything, he had the gall to ask for my help. "You've got some nerve," I finally managed to say. "After everything, you think you can just call me and ask for money?" I know, but you're the only one I can turn to," he pleaded. The sound of his begging was almost surreal, a stark contrast to the man who once held himself so high above me. I let out a bitter laugh. "You made your bed, Alex. It's time you lay in it." And with that, I hung up, a sense of finality washing over me. But the universe wasn't done testing me yet. Not long after Alex's call, David reached out, his voice soft and contrite. "Mom, I messed up. I see that now. I believed Dad's lies, and I turned my back on you. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Maybe you could talk to Grandma about the will?" Hearing my son, my flesh and blood, begging for forgiveness and a second chance should have softened me, but the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. "David, I'm glad you've come to see the truth, but it's not that simple. You hurt us, deeply. It's going to take more than an apology to mend things. But, Mom, I hope you find your way, David. But for now, I need space. As for Grandma, that's a conversation you need to have with her yourself, when the time is right." And with that, I ended the call, the echo of his pleas lingering long after. Life, however, has a way of moving forward, even when we're stuck looking back. In the months that followed, I found love again in the most unexpected of places. He was the owner of a well-known restaurant chain, a man whose kindness and strength were a balm to my weary soul. We married, not with the fanfare of my first wedding, but with a quiet joy that spoke of deeper, truer things. Laura was there, as she always had been, her presence a reminder of the family we choose for ourselves. Our friendship, forged in the fires of shared pain and triumph, remained unbreakable. To new beginnings, she toasted at the wedding, her smile bright with genuine happiness. As for Alex and David, I wished them well in their own journeys, hoping they would find redemption and peace in their own ways. Life, after all, is a series of lessons, and I had learned mine well. Now, it was time to live. My life wasn't always a roller coaster. There was a time when everything seemed perfectly aligned, like stars in a clear night sky. That was until the storm hit, and boy, did it hit hard. Let me take you back to where it all started. My name's Ava, just a regular gal who landed a job at a prestigious family-owned company. That's where I met Jack, my future storm, though back then, he was just a handsome guy with a killer smile working the same grind as me. Hey, Ava, right? I've seen you around. Jack Harrison. He introduced himself one day at the office, extending a hand that felt like it was molded just for mine. Yeah, that's me. Nice to meet you, Jack, I replied, feeling a spark I hadn't felt before. Our office romance blossomed faster than a wildfire, and before I knew it, we were tying the knot. It was a beautiful ceremony, the kind you see in movies, but little did I know, it was the calm before the storm. Jack's family, especially his mom, Mrs. Harrison, and his dad, the big boss of the company, had their own ideas about what my role in the family should be. Ava, dear, you know it's best if you focus on the home. Let Jack handle the business, Mrs. Harrison would often say, her words coated with a sweetness that couldn't mask the bitterness I felt being sidelined. But I have a degree and experience. I can contribute to the company. I tried to argue once, only to be met with a patronizing chuckle from Mr. Harrison. Darling, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's leave the business to those who know it, he said, dismissing me as if I were a child. Jack didn't stand up for me. Instead, he echoed his family's sentiments. Babe, it's for the best. You'll see. We can start a family, and you'll have all the time to take care of our home, he said, wrapping his arm around me, trying to sell me a future I never asked for. I eventually gave in, quitting my job to become the housewife they all wanted me to be. But satisfaction was far from what I found. Each day felt like I was losing a piece of myself, my identity drowned out by the endless cycle of household chores and Jack's increasing demands. I tried to reach out to Jack, to tell him how isolated and belittled I felt. Jack, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm more than just a cook or a cleaner, I pleaded one night, hoping to find the man I fell in love with. Ava, you're being dramatic. This is what women do, they take care of their homes. And honestly, you could put a bit more effort into it. And yourself, he shot back, his words like daggers to my heart. That conversation was the first of many storms to come, each one eroding the love and respect I had for Jack. I started to see the man he truly was, not the one I married but someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenience, an accessory to his life of privilege and entitlement. Life after marriage and Ethan's birth was supposed to be the dream, but instead, it felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to dodge the next criticism or sarcastic remark. The warmth in our home had turned cold, and the cracks in my marriage to Jack began to show, deep and jagged. One evening, as I set the dinner table, hoping to bring some semblance of normalcy back into our home, Jack walked in, his face twisted in displeasure the moment he saw the spread. "What's this?" he asked, poking at the food with a fork as if it might bite back. "It's your favorite, lasagna. I tried a new recipe, thought it might be a nice change," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, bracing myself for his reaction. Jack took a bite, chewed for a moment, and then pushed the plate away, his face contorted in disgust. "This is your idea of a nice change? It tastes like cardboard." Can't you do anything right? His words felt like a slap across the face. I fought back tears, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I'm sorry you didn't like it. I'll try something else tomorrow, I replied, my voice steady but my heart breaking. Don't bother. I'll just order from the restaurant. At least they know how to cook, he retorted, grabbing his phone to dial. That night, as I cleaned up the untouched plates of food, Mrs. Harrison made her grand entrance, as if on cue, ready to add salt to the wound. Ava, dear, I heard about your little cooking mishap. Let me show you how it's done. Not that you'll ever learn, she said, her tone patronizing, her eyes scanning the kitchen with undisguised contempt. I wanted to scream, to tell her to get out of my kitchen, my home, but I held my tongue. Arguing with her was like talking to a brick wall, only more frustrating. As she took over the stove, demonstrating how to make the perfect lasagna, I couldn't help but think back to the days when Jack and I would cook together, laughing and sharing stories. Those days felt like a distant memory now, replaced by criticism and cold shoulders. Jack's disdain for my cooking was just one of the many issues. He started commenting on my appearance, making snide remarks about the weight I hadn't lost since Ethan's birth, about how I didn't dress up anymore or bother with makeup. Ava, look at yourself. You've let yourself go. Is it any wonder I prefer eating out? He'd say, his words dripping with disdain. I'm taking care of Ethan, the house, everything. When do you expect me to find the time to go to the gym or get dolled up? It's not like you're helping, I shot back one day, my patience wearing thin. Jack just laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the empty spaces of our home. Excuses, Ava. You're just lazy. And you wonder why I'm out more often? Maybe if you put in some effort, I'd want to spend time at home. His words stung, a reminder of how far we'd drifted apart. The man I married, who used to look at me like I was the only woman in the world, now looked through me, as if I were nothing more than a nuisance. The cracks in our marriage weren't just showing, they were widening, threatening to swallow me whole. I felt trapped, caught in a cycle of trying to please a man who no longer saw my worth, and battling a mother-in-law who relished in my failures. Life as a full-time housewife was a tough gig, more so when your input was constantly belittled. I remember this one evening vividly, a turning point of sorts. It was during one of those rare moments I thought I could bridge my old life with my new one. We were sitting around the dinner table, the Harrison men, discussing the company's latest venture. I saw an opening, a chance to remind them, and maybe myself, that I wasn't just background noise. You know, if you tweaked your marketing strategy to target a younger demographic, you could increase your market share significantly. I chimed in, my voice steady, but my heart racing. Jack and his dad, mid-bite, exchanged looks that screamed, "Is she for real?" Mr. Harrison, after a dramatic pause, let out a laugh that echoed off the walls. Ava, sweetheart, stick to what you know. This is business, not some home project. Yeah, babe. Let the men handle the big stuff, Jack added, his tone laced with a condescension that made my blood boil. I pushed back, feeling my old fire flickering. Actually, I have a degree in finance. Remember? I might know a thing or two that could help. But Jack waved me off. Finance, schminance. It's cute you want to help, but let's not pretend you're a player in this game. The conversation moved on, but I sat there, stewing in a mix of anger and humiliation. It was clear I was no longer seen as an equal, if I ever was. Later that night, I called my dad, needing to vent to someone who saw me as more than just a sideline spouse. Dad, I'm so tired of being dismissed. I tried to offer advice tonight, and Jack and his dad laughed in my face, I said, the frustration evident in my voice. Sweetheart, I've told you about them. They're all high and mighty because of that company. But you're smart, and you're strong. You don't need their validation. My dad's voice was calm, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath. He then dropped a bombshell. You know what? Let's give them a taste of their own medicine. I've got some money saved up from my investments. How about we buy a significant stake in their precious company? I laughed, the idea sounding absurd and thrilling all at once. Dad, you're joking, right? We can't just buy into the company. Why not? It's public, isn't it? Let's shake things up a bit. Show them you're not just some trophy wife, he said, the mischief in his voice infectious. The idea was tempting, a way to reclaim some of the respect I'd lost, not just from them, but from myself. But it also felt like stepping into a battlefield I wasn't sure I was ready for. I'll think about it, Dad. It's a lot, I said, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. The day everything changed wasn't marked by any particular event. It was just a regular morning, but for me, it was the beginning of the end, and a new beginning. I had been feeling off for weeks, tired beyond the usual exhaustion that came with managing a home and taking care of Ethan, our son. Jack noticed too, but his concern felt more obligatory than genuine. Ava, you look like hell. What's wrong with you? He asked one morning, his tone more annoyed than concerned. I don't know, Jack. I'm just tired. Really tired, I replied, trying to muster a smile, but even that felt like too much effort. Maybe you should see a doctor. I can't have you being lazy around the house, he said, his words cutting deeper than he probably intended. So, I went to the doctor, expecting to be told I needed more vitamins or rest. But what I got instead was a diagnosis that turned my world upside down: breast cancer. I remember sitting there, in that sterile office, feeling like I was outside my body, watching as the doctor's mouth moved, words coming out that didn't make sense. Cancer? Me? When I told Jack, his reaction was far from what I'd hoped for. Cancer? Are you serious? How did this happen? He said, more in anger than worry. How does this happen to anyone, Jack? I don't know. But I need treatment. Surgery, maybe more, I said, the weight of my own words sinking in. And what about Ethan? And the house? Who's going to take care of everything? He asked, his priorities laying bare the gap between us. I felt a loneliness then that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This was my partner, the man I'd chosen to build a life with, and in my moment of greatest need, he was worried about who would take care of the house. The following weeks were a blur of appointments and treatments. I grew weaker, physically and emotionally, and Jack grew distant. The few times I tried to talk to him about my fears, my hopes, he brushed me off. And then a terrible thing happened. The doctor, with a solemn look that prefaced bad news, told me that the best course of action was a mastectomy. Breast removal surgery. The words echoed in my head, a relentless echo that refused to fade. I was reeling from the news, but I knew I had to tell Jack. His reaction, however, was something I could never have prepared for. When I told him about the surgery, I searched his face for any sign of support or compassion. Instead, I was met with a look that I can only describe as disgust. It was a fleeting moment, but it was there, unmistakable and cutting deep. He didn't say anything, just turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my fears and the growing realization of how alone I truly was. The day of the surgery arrived, and with it, a profound sense of isolation. Lying in the hospital bed, I faced not only the physical pain of my ordeal, but the acute awareness that Jack, the man who had promised to be by my side in sickness and in health, was conspicuously absent. My parents were there, their faces etched with worry and love, but the space where Jack should have been was glaringly empty. Not once did he come to the hospital. Not a single visit from him or even my father-in-law. It was as if, in their eyes, my illness had rendered me invisible, unworthy of their time or concern. I lay there, post-surgery, grappling with the pain and the betrayal, feeling more alone than ever. Coming back from the hospital felt like stepping into an alternate reality. I stood at the doorstep of what used to be my home, my heart pounding, not from the pain of surgery, but from the uncertainty of what awaited me. The door swung open, and there he was, Jack, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a young woman, her presence like a slap in the face. Before I could process the scene before me, Jack's words cut through the air, cold and sharp. "Here are your things," he said, gesturing to a couple of suitcases on the porch. And these, he handed me a stack of papers, our divorce papers. I want you out, Ava. I stared at him, disbelief and pain warring within me. Jack, what are you saying? This is my home, our home. He scoffed, a cruel edge to his voice. Not anymore. I don't need a woman without breasts. I've moved on. She's everything you're not, he said, his arm wrapping around the waist of the woman beside him. The words were a physical blow, leaving me reeling. I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly drowned out by a profound sense of betrayal. Without another word, I grabbed my things and left, the finality of the moment weighing heavily on me. I went to my in-laws next, hoping for some semblance of support, or at the very least, to see my son. The reception I received was as cold as the one I had just left. My mother-in-law's eyes raked over me with undisguised contempt. When Ethan was brought to me, his face lit up, a stark contrast to the tension around us. "Mommy," he exclaimed, throwing his arms around me. The warmth of his embrace was a small comfort in the sea of coldness. My father-in-law didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Take your son and leave," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "And don't even think about claiming any part of our property. You'll get nothing." As I stood there, trying to muster the strength to leave, my mother-in-law's voice stopped me. "You're nothing but an inferior woman now," she said, her words laced with venom. "No wonder he doesn't want you." The words stung, but they also fueled a fire within me. With Ethan by my side, I left, knowing that this was not the end for us. It was a bitter farewell to a life that had become a prison. Back at my parents' house, with Ethan playing quietly in the corner of the room, I sat down with my dad, the weight of the world on my shoulders. The air was thick with tension, but also an unspoken understanding. My dad was the first to break the silence. "Ava, remember what we talked about before? About the company shares," he said, his voice steady, his gaze meeting mine. I let out a humorless laugh, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me. "Dad, I thought you were joking. After everything, it feels like... I don't know, like grasping at straws." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I wasn't joking, Ava. I did it. I bought a significant stake in the Harrison Company." I blinked, the words taking a moment to register. "You what? Dad, do you know what this means?" He nodded, a sly smile playing on his lips. "Yes, it means you have leverage, Ava. It means you can fight back." The idea was ludicrous, yet incredibly tempting. It was a chance to regain some control, to not be the victim in this narrative any longer. But how? "Jack and his family have made it clear they want nothing to do with me," I countered, the doubt evident in my voice. "That may be true, but now you're not just Ava, the cast-aside wife. You're Ava, the shareholder. You have a say in how things are run, maybe even get a seat on the board," he said, the possibility hanging in the air like a promise. The conversation shifted then, to logistics, to legalities, to strategies. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, a flicker of excitement at the prospect of turning the tables. "But what about Ethan? And Mom?" I asked, my resolve firming, but my concern for my family paramount. "We're in this together, Ava. Your mom and I, we've got your back. And Ethan, he's going to see his mom standing up for herself. That's important," Dad said, his voice filled with conviction. It was a plan born out of desperation, but it was a plan nonetheless. As the night grew deeper, and Ethan fell asleep on the couch, I realized this was more than just about revenge or retribution. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and showing my son the strength of standing up for oneself. "Dad, let's do this. Let's shake things up," I said, a determined resolve settling over me. He nodded, a proud smile on his face. "That's my girl." As I tucked Ethan into bed that night, the uncertainty of the future loomed large. Yet, beneath it all was a burgeoning sense of empowerment. For the first time in a long while, I looked forward to what the next day would bring, ready to face the challenges head-on. This unexpected twist was not just a lifeline, it was a call to arms. And I was ready to answer it. Walking into the annual meeting, I felt like I was stepping into a lion's den. There they were, Jack and his dad, looking all confident and in charge. Their faces dropped when they saw me, though. "What are you doing here, Ava?" Jack asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. I didn't miss a beat. Pulling out the documents, I laid them on the table with a thud. "I own 90% of the company now. That means I'm not just here to sit pretty, I'm here to call the shots." You could have heard a pin drop. Jack and his dad exchanged looks, their faces going from confused to downright angry. "This is ridiculous. You can't just barge in here and take over," Jack's dad blustered, standing up from his chair. I shot him a look, my patience wearing thin. "Sit down, or I'll have security help you do it. This is happening, whether you like it or not." I then laid out my plan, clear and straightforward. We're going to shift the company's direction. I have a plan that will double our profits. It's time for a change, and I'm leading it. The room was silent as I spoke, everyone processing the bomb I'd just dropped. You could see the wheels turning in their heads, calculating the possibilities. Jack tried to argue, his pride wounded. "You think you can just waltz in and run the show? This is my family's company." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "It was your family's company. Now, it's mine. And I'm not just waltzing in, I've got a plan, and the board agrees." The decision was made. The board, seeing the potential in my plan, backed me up. It was a surreal moment, watching Jack and his father realize the tables had turned. As the meeting ended, and the room cleared, Jack approached me, his demeanor changed. "Ava, let's talk about this. There's got to be a way we can work together." But it was too late for negotiations or pleasantries. "We're past talking, Jack. It's time for action. And as for working together, that ship has sailed. It's time for a new era, and I'm at the helm." After the dust settled from the shareholders' meeting, I took the helm of the company with a mix of determination and anticipation. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, planning sessions, and getting up to speed on every aspect of the business. I was determined to turn the company around, not just for the sake of profits, but to prove to myself and everyone else that I could do this. One afternoon, as I was poring over some reports, Ethan burst into my office, his eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, you're like a superhero now. You own a whole company." I couldn't help but laugh, pulling him into a hug. "Well, I don't know about superhero, but I'm definitely trying to make some big changes." He looked up at me, his expression turning serious. "Does this mean you're going to be too busy for me now?" The question hit me harder than any boardroom challenge. I knelt down to his level, holding his hands in mine. "Ethan, there's nothing more important to me than you. We're a team, remember? I might have more work, but we'll always make time for each other." He smiled, his earlier worry replaced by a gleam of pride. "Okay, Mom. I believe you. Can I help with the company too?" "Sure, you can be my special advisor." "How does that sound?" I teased, ruffling his hair. "Awesome," he exclaimed, already brimming with ideas. The next challenge came from within the company itself. Some of the longtime employees were resistant to change, skeptical of my leadership. I called a staff meeting, determined to address their concerns head-on. "I know there are doubts, and I understand why," I started, scanning the room. "But I promise you, every decision I make is with the future of this company in mind. We have an incredible opportunity to grow, to innovate, and I want all of you to be a part of that." There was silence for a moment before one of the senior managers spoke up. "We've seen what you're proposing, Ava. It's ambitious, but if anyone can lead us there, I believe it's you." Nods and murmurs of agreement filled the room, a tangible shift in the atmosphere. It was the beginning of a new era for the company, and for me. As months turned into a year, the company's fortunes began to change. We were making strides, hitting targets that once seemed out of reach. And with each success, my confidence grew, not just in my professional abilities, but in my personal resilience. Jack reached out a few times, hints of regret in his messages, but I knew that some bridges were meant to burn. I was building a new life, one that was defined by my own terms, my own successes and failures. Sitting in my office one evening, looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the journey. From feeling lost and diminished to standing strong, leading a company, and raising an incredible son. It hadn't been easy, but I had emerged on the other side, not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. "Ethan, time to go home," I called out, closing my laptop. He ran into the room, his latest drawing in hand, a colorful depiction of us together, standing tall. "This is us, Mom. We're a team," he said, his eyes shining. "Yes, we are," I replied, holding his drawing close. "And we always will be." As we walked out of the office together, I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready. I had rebuilt my life on my terms, and no matter what came next, I had the strength to face it. Name's Margaret, 69, and still sharp as a tack. Spent my years running a tight ship at a hotel, worked my way up to manager, before I called it quits. My husband, George, he's the entrepreneurial sort, had his own venture that kept us more than comfortable. But don't get it twisted, we weren't ones for splashing cash left and right. I've always been about value, picking things for their durability, not their dazzle. George, he always had my back on this. "Margaret, you've got a head on your shoulders that's worth two," he'd say with a nod. "Keep pinching those pennies." And pinch we did, amassing a nice little cushion for ourselves. Our son, Alex, was the light of our lives. Gave him the best start we could, focusing on his education. Post-college, he dived into the family business, learning the ropes from George. When he hit 30, he came to us with a sparkle in his eye, said he'd found the one, a girl named Emily. We were all for it, eager to meet the lady who'd captured our boy's heart. Now, George, he's got an eye for character, and he wasn't sold on Emily from the jump. As we were setting up the house for their big introduction dinner, he muttered to me, "Margaret, there's something about that girl. Keep your eyes peeled." "George, let's give her a fair shake," I countered, adjusting the tablecloth. "Alex seems over the moon." "Just saying, keep a lookout," he grumbled, but he left it at that. The night they were to come over, I cooked up a storm. Wanted everything to be perfect for Emily's first impression of us. When they arrived, Alex was beaming, and Emily, well, she was a sight, polished and poised, but with a warmth in her smile. Dinner was laid out, and we all settled in, the air buzzing with a mix of anticipation and the scent of my roasted chicken. "So, Emily, Alex tells us you're into graphic design?" I ventured, hoping to break the ice. "Yeah, I love it. It's my passion, really," Emily replied, her eyes lighting up. "But tonight, I'm more interested in this amazing dinner." "Margaret, you've outdone yourself." George chuckled, his usual stern demeanor softening a bit. "Don't let the food distract you too much. We want to know all about you, what makes you tick." Emily laughed, a genuine, easy sound. "Well, I'm an open book. Ask away." The evening rolled on, with stories shared and laughter bouncing off the walls. George, ever the skeptic, threw in his tough questions, but Emily held her own, her replies both thoughtful and candid. That night I felt a warm glow in my heart. Sure, George and I were cautious by nature, but seeing our son so happy, so in love, it was worth opening our doors, and our hearts, to whatever came next. Life had a way of moving on, even when you tried to stand still. After Emily joined the family, I did my best to stick to my guns about not meddling. Adults will manage their own lives, I'd always said. But sometimes, what you want to believe and what's staring you in the face don't quite line up. George repeated his concerns. "That girl, she's got an angle," he said to me one quiet evening. We were sitting in our living room, the TV muttering to itself in the background. "George, let them be. Alex is happy," I replied, folding some laundry, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Happiness is one thing, being blind is another. Just watch," he grumbled, his eyes fixed on some late-night show that neither of us were watching. George's words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to wave them away, but they lingered, stubborn and thick. It wasn't long before I started seeing little things. Emily had quit her job not long after the wedding, saying she wanted to focus on the house. Fair enough, I thought. But the house didn't seem to need that much focusing. Every time I visited, things were, well, just as they should be, but Emily was off and out. One afternoon, I dropped by unannounced. Emily was there, surprisingly, sipping on some fancy-looking smoothie. "Oh, it's just something new I'm trying," she said, noticing my glance. "You know, gotta stay healthy." I nodded, though I couldn't help but think of the price tag on her health kick. "Is Alex home?" I asked. "Nope, busy with the business." "You know how it is," she replied, her tone light, almost too light. "Yeah, I do," I said, memories of George's long hours flooding back. "He's working hard, then?" "Always," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But he says it's worth it. We're planning a little getaway. A break for both of us." "That's nice," I managed, though alarm bells were ringing in my head. A getaway sounded expensive, especially with the business just transferred to Alex's hands. George's skepticism about Emily came back to me that evening. "She's living it up while our boy's grinding away," he said when I told him about the visit. "Maybe she just wants to make the most of their time together," I suggested, though doubt was creeping into my own heart. "Or maybe she's making the most of Alex's wallet," George countered. I didn't want to admit it, but George's words were finding fertile ground in my worries. It wasn't just about Emily quitting her job or her spending habits, it was about how she seemed to be steering Alex, our son, into a lifestyle that didn't fit with the values we'd tried to instill in him. "Let's just keep an eye on things, for now," I said to George later. "But we'll do it quietly. Alex is a grown man, and he needs to make his own decisions." George nodded, but there was a resolve in his gaze. "We'll watch. And when the time comes, we'll be there for him." Life kept rolling, and despite my best efforts to keep a lid on my worries, things got a lot more complicated. George and I had our suspicions about Emily, but we never expected the curveball life was about to throw our way. It was out of nowhere. George, my rock, started feeling off. Nothing specific, just tired more than usual and a bit under the weather. We thought it was just a bug or the tail end of a cold. But when he didn't get any better, I nagged him until he went to see the doctor. That visit turned our world upside down. "Blood cancer," they said. It felt like a cruel joke, a misdiagnosis surely. But it wasn't. The disease was aggressive, unforgiving. The speed at which everything happened next was dizzying. Treatments, consultations, hospital visits, it was a whirlwind of medical jargon and false hopes. George fought hard, bless him, but the cancer was merciless. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. Just like that, he was gone. The night George passed, the house felt empty, colder somehow. I sat in our living room, surrounded by memories, feeling lost. George's warnings about Emily, his concerns for Alex, echoed in my mind. He'd been trying to protect us, even when facing his own mortality. "We'll watch. And when the time comes, we'll be there for him," he had said. And now, it was all on me. The grief was a heavy companion in those days. But amidst it, there was a resolve forming inside me. George's passing was a stark reminder that life was unpredictable, and sitting back wasn't an option anymore. I had to keep an eye on Emily and Alex, maybe even closer now than before. George wouldn't be there to share his observations or to back me up, but I knew what needed to be done. When I got the news that Alex and Emily were expecting, it was like a burst of sunshine through the clouds. I was over the moon, thinking about the little one on the way. I figured it was the perfect chance to bridge any gaps between me and Emily. She seemed keen on the idea too, so I started dropping by their place more often, lending a hand wherever I could. I was all in, buying bits and bobs for the baby, nothing fancy, just good, solid stuff that I thought would come in handy. One afternoon, I showed up at their doorstep, arms laden with goodies. Emily's reaction, though, was far from what I expected. She sifted through the bags with a look that could sour milk. "What's this?" "None of these are brand names," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I was taken aback, not gonna lie. "Honey, when it comes to babies, it's the quality that counts, not some fancy label," I tried to explain, keeping my voice even. Emily tossed a stuffed animal back into the bag like it was trash. "Alex's got the money. And with his dad gone, well, it's ours now. We can afford the best for my daughter." Her words stung. "Those savings are the result of years of careful spending," I shot back, feeling my temper rise. She just smirked, throwing the gifts aside. "I deserve the best. So does my baby." I tried to chalk it up to hormones, telling myself things would get better once the baby arrived. But deep down, I knew we were worlds apart in our thinking. Visits to their house became more frequent as the due date approached. I wanted to be there for Emily, despite our differences. But every conversation seemed to circle back to her wanting the most expensive things for the baby, things that screamed more about status than sense. One day, I couldn't hold back. "Emily, love, you know all these fancy things won't make a bit of difference to your baby, right? She needs love, warmth, and care, not designer labels." Emily huffed, rolling her eyes. "You just don't get it. This is how I want to raise my daughter." "Alex agrees with me, don't you, babe?" Alex, caught in the middle, looked like a deer in headlights. "Well, I just want what's best for you and the baby, Em." I sighed, realizing this was a battle I wasn't going to win. "Just remember, it's the time you spend with your child that counts, not the money." Emily's response was a dismissive wave as she turned her attention back to her phone, scrolling through pages of high-end baby gear. Leaving their house that day, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. It wasn't just about the money or the things. It was about values, about understanding what really mattered in life. I hoped, for Alex's sake and the baby's, that Emily would come to see that. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were heading for trouble. After the little one came into the world, I thought things might settle down. But boy, was I wrong. Emily's taste for the high life only got worse, turning my son's house into what looked more like a high-end store than a home. Cribs, strollers, toys, you name it, if it had a designer label, it was probably somewhere in their living room. I kept telling myself it was all for my granddaughter, that she deserved the world and more. I spent as much time as I could with my granddaughter, taking her out for walks, just soaking up all the joy she brought into my life. I never asked for a dime from Emily for helping out. Truth be told, I would have paid them for the privilege of spending time with that little angel. One day, I came back from a walk a bit earlier than usual. My granddaughter needed a change, and I figured I'd pop in without making a fuss. Emily gave me a key for emergencies and to drop off food now and then, so I let myself in quietly, not wanting to startle anyone. As I tiptoed through the hallway, I heard voices coming from the living room. Emily was chatting with a friend, and what I heard next stopped me dead in my tracks. They were talking about money, my money, and Emily's plans to take a hefty chunk of it, divorce my son, and leave him high and dry. My heart sank as she went on about how little she cared for Alex and their daughter, how she was eyeing a way out and into the arms of another man. Panic and disbelief gripped me as I scrambled to get my phone out and hit record. I needed proof, something to show Alex, to protect him and my granddaughter from this scheming. But just as I got close enough to catch every treacherous word, my granddaughter stirred in my arms and started to cry. I quickly stashed my phone away and stepped into the living room, feigning ignorance. "Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Just came in to change this little one. Emily glanced up, her face a mask of surprise that quickly shifted back to that cold, calculating look I'd come to know all too well. No problem, we were just finishing up anyway, she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. As I changed my granddaughter, my mind raced. How could I have been so blind? How could I protect my son and this innocent child from the fallout of Emily's selfish plans? The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew I had to act, and fast. But first, I needed to gather my thoughts, to plan my next steps carefully. My son's future, my granddaughter's well-being, they all hinged on what I did next. As I left their house that day, a resolve hardened within me. I wouldn't let Emily destroy my family. I had the truth on my side now, and I'd do whatever it took to expose her deceit and keep my loved ones safe. The walk home was a blur, my mind a whirlwind of fear, anger, and determination. This was war, and I was ready to fight. For my son, for my granddaughter, for the memory of a husband who had always taught me to stand up for what's right. The morning after I overheard Emily's shocking conversation, I was all set to call Alex and spill everything. But, as fate would have it, he beat me to the punch, ringing me up first thing. What he said next floored me. "Mom, I think it's best if you don't come over anymore." Alex's voice was strained, awkward. I nearly dropped the phone. "What are you talking about, Alex? Why?" He hesitated. "Emily, she's saying things got messy at the house after your visits. And some stuff's missing. Expensive stuff." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Are you serious? She's pinning this on me?" My voice cracked, a mix of hurt and disbelief churning inside. "Mom, It's complicated. Emily's upset, and I gotta support my wife, you know?" Support his wife? Against his own mother? "Alex, you know me. I'd never take anything from you guys. We need to talk, face to face." He sighed, the sound heavy over the line. "I can't, Mom. Work slammed. Just, give it some time, okay?" I hung up, the phone slipping through my trembling hands. This was Emily's doing, clear as day. She was isolating me, turning my own son against me. But why? Was it just to cover her tracks, to keep me from spilling about her plans? I was in a daze, the accusations ringing in my ears. Me, accused of making a mess, of stealing? It was ludicrous, hurtful. And the worst part was Alex believing it, even for a second. In a world turned upside down, I found myself knocking on the door of my old lawyer, Mr. Thompson. The office smelled of leather and wisdom, a comfort in these turbulent times. "Mrs. Davis, what brings you in today?" Mr. Thompson asked, peering over his glasses as I took a seat across from him. I spilled everything, the whole sordid tale. He listened, nodding, his face a mask of concern. After I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Your husband was a wise man, Mrs. Davis. He saw the potential for trouble. The will, it's quite clear. You're the sole heir. Alex, well, he's essentially in a managerial position as long as you're around. The money they've been burning through? It's from a special account, already near empty." I felt a mix of relief and sadness. George, always looking out for us, even beyond the grave. So, what's left is safe from Emily's grasp. Exactly. Only you can access the main reserve, and not for another 2 years, he confirmed. I sighed, a weight lifting slightly. George, he always was thinking ahead. Mr. Thompson suggested a next step. Hiring a detective might be wise. Gather evidence of Emily's actions. It could be crucial. I shook my head, the thought of snooping around like that didn't sit right with me. No, I can't do that. It feels wrong. There has to be another way. Understood. But keep it in mind. Sometimes, we need hard evidence to open the eyes of those we love, he advised, his tone gentle yet firm. Leaving the office, I felt armed with new information but burdened with how to use it. George had protected us in ways I hadn't even imagined, and now it was up to me to navigate these choppy waters without sinking our family ship. With a heavy heart but a determined spirit, I hatched a plan that would either save my family or fracture it beyond repair. I dialed Emily, my voice steady. "I've got an offer for you, one that's worth your while, $200,000. I said, cutting straight to the chase. Her interest was piqued. "Go on," she replied, her tone dripping with a mix of curiosity and greed. "We'll talk tomorrow. Be ready," I said, hanging up before she could probe further. Next, I called Alex. "Son, I need you to do something for me." "No questions asked, all right?" "It's for your daughter's safety," I implored him. He was hesitant but agreed. "Okay, Mom, what do you need?" "Install a baby monitor in your living room. Make sure it's hidden well. And listen in from your car tomorrow at noon. Please, just trust me," I explained. The next day felt like the longest of my life. As noon approached, I sat across from Emily, the air between us thick with unsaid words. I repeated my offer, watching her reaction closely. "So, you think you can just buy me off with $200,000? Is that it?" Emily sneered, her eyes cold and calculating. I kept my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside. "It's a way out, Emily. For both of us. You get a fresh start, and we get peace." Emily laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "A fresh start? Please. You think I don't know about the real money? Your husband left you sitting on a gold mine, and you think I'm walking away from that with just pennies?" I felt a chill run down my spine. This was worse than I thought. "Emily, you're talking about destroying a family here. My son, your husband." "Alex?" She cut me off, her tone dripping with disdain. "He's just a stepping stone. I've got plans, big plans. And they don't include playing happy families in this dead-end life." I swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure. "And what about Lily, your daughter? Does she fit into these plans of yours?" Emily waved a hand dismissively. "Lily will be fine. Once I'm done with Alex and have what I want, I'll have nannies for that. Besides, once I'm living the high life with someone who actually has ambition, she'll thank me." The audacity of her words left me speechless. This was no longer just about money, it was about a complete disregard for the family she had married into. "And you, dear mother-in-law," Emily continued, leaning forward, a sinister gleam in her eyes. "I've got special plans for you. Ever heard of those lovely little nursing homes? You'll have plenty of time to think about your mistakes there, away from my new life and all this money." Anger and disbelief warred within me. "You think you can just take everything? That you can destroy lives and walk away?" Emily smirked, standing up, her posture one of someone who believed they had already won. "I don't think, I know. I've got everything planned out. Alex is clueless, and with you out of the picture, there'll be nothing stopping me." It was clear now, Emily was a predator, cloaked in the guise of a family member. But as I looked at her, a resolve hardened within me. She underestimated the bond of family, the strength of a mother's love. "You're wrong, Emily. You've underestimated me, underestimated us. You won't get away with this," I said, my voice firm, laced with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Emily's laugh was cut short as Alex entered the room, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. The confrontation that followed was a blur, but one thing was clear, the truth was out, and with it, Emily's house of cards began to crumble. After the storm had passed, and Emily was out of our lives for good, Alex came to me one quiet evening. The air was cooler, carrying the promise of a fresh start. We sat down at the kitchen table, a space that had witnessed countless family discussions, both joyful and difficult. "Mom, I don't even know where to start," Alex began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing what was right in front of me, for not listening to you. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. Alex, you're my son. There's nothing to forgive. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and we move forward. He nodded, a single tear escaping down his cheek. I can't believe I let her drive a wedge between us. That recording, it opened my eyes. I should have known better. Sometimes, love blinds us, Alex. You wanted to believe in the person you married. No one can fault you for that, I reassured him, squeezing his hand. He wiped away his tear, a small smile breaking through. I've filed for divorce. And the judge granted me full custody of Lily. Emily, she didn't get a cent, thanks to that recording and the will Dad left. I'm just glad it's over. And that Lily is safe with us, I said, the relief palpable in my voice. Yeah. And, Mom, I need you more than ever now. Will you help me raise her? His eyes, so much like his father's, held a mix of hope and fear. Alex, there's nothing I'd rather do more than be there for you and Lily. We're a family, and we'll get through this together, I promised, my heart full. In the weeks that followed, our home was filled with the sounds of a child's laughter once more. Lily, unaffected by the turmoil, brought a new sense of purpose and joy into our lives. Watching Alex grow into his role as a single father was a bittersweet reminder of the cycles of life. One afternoon, as Alex and I watched Lily play in the garden, he turned to me, a thoughtful look on his face. Mom, you were right. Sometimes, we have to step in, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I'm just sorry it took me so long to see it. I smiled, watching Lily chase a butterfly. We live and learn, Alex. What's important is that we're here for each other, no matter what.